Yes, hello everyone. Now I would like to invite the teams to turn on your camera so we can start. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here, especially thank you, Ms. Fodas, for being here as our judge. Now I shall start with an introduction. Hello everyone, welcome to the day 4 of the preliminary rounds. I'm Charlotte Trung and I will be your session supervisor today along with our timekeeper, Ms. Wandi. The session will run for a total of 40 minutes. You will get notified when there's 1 minute left for the opening speech and 20 seconds remaining for each argument during the rebuttal phase. We also want to emphasize that for this round, we will have double timekeeping, which means that both me and the timekeeper will be in charge of the timekeeping. So we have more accuracy in the timekeeping this time. Should you experience any prolonged technical difficulties or get disconnected, the timer will be paused and you can contact me or Ms. Wandi via the chat function. Now we would like to invite the teams to turn off your camera and place yourself on mute during the performance of the other participant. Now we can draw the pros and cons position of the two participating team. I will share my screen right now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, thank you. I will start with Dom Header for the position of pro or con, and the other team will be the other position. Yes. So Dom Header will take the position of pro and Lynn will be con. Now you will have 5 minutes to get prepared and we will announce when it's 30 minutes left and we will start the session. Yes, your time for preparation it's up. Before starting the session, I would like to confirm the topic once again. The topic for this session is Europe must support Brazil and the protection of Amazonia using international law. Don Hutter will take the pro position on the topic, and Lynn will take the con position on the topic. And now I would like to invite the pro team to start their opening speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be sure before my timer starts, am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, honorable judges, counterpart colleagues. My name is Augusto Jesus, and along with my teammates Bernardo Leal with the rebuttals and Matheus Mendonça with the final speech, I will defend that Europe must support Brazil and the protection of Amazonia using international law. The Amazon certainly involves security, sustainable development, and mainly human dignity, which makes it urgent to evaluate the international legal consequences of the territory management adopted by Amazonian states, especially Brazil. Within this context, we advocate our position under three main grounds. First, there is a duty of vigilance and a duty not to cause damage to internationalized areas. Second, Europe is inevitably related to some extent with the Amazon deforestation. And third, Europe has committed to support Brazil through international agreements. With such premises in mind, firstly, general international law often expresses negative obligations regarding environmental law. For instance, as stated by the 2007 Arbitral Award on the maritime border between Guyana and Suriname, there is an erga omnes obligation not to cause damage to the environment of other states or internationalized areas. Albeit this statement, positive obligations prevail under environmental law, which require commissive acts such as the duty of vigilance. Due to its major transboundary effects, the Amazon is an area of common concern to all international community, as its protection implies the preservation of biodiversity and the maintenance of an essential biome to face climate change. In this sense, the current international crisis due to accelerated deforestation and burning in Amazonia subjects most countries, from a teleological perspective, to take decisive and urgent measures to solve this issue. Undeniably, these actions would be much simplified through financial aid to Brazil, the single country that withholds the biggest territorial bond with the Amazon, as the government is unable to handle these issues by itself, especially because many international agents benefit from illegal material from the region. Ergo, this actually takes us to our second point, that Europe is in some degree related with illicit acts of private parties. Commercial relations between Europe and Brazil have undergone intense altercation involving biopiracy and deforestation in South America. In fact, recent diligences by the Brazilian federal police have shown that apprehended illegal logging in Amazonia was subject to commercial agreements and prompt exportation. Accordingly, environmental principles are often put aside for the international trade of material in the region, in North America, and Europe, being impossible for states as Brazil to restore the Amazonian biome without proper foreign aid to compensate the recurrent practices of the unlawful logging industry. In this way, financial aid should be paid by Europe to support Brazil through an effective cooperation in the reestablishment of an injured biome for the satisfaction of private interests. Finally, as our third point, we underpin that by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, developed countries are committed to provide financial resources and to transfer technology to developing countries to help them meet the agreed costs of implementing obligations under the convention. Hence, European initiatives such as mechanisms already created to incorporate forest protection must take into account the important commitments made in order to share the burden of developing countries, like Brazil, of creating measures to address the climate change agenda through the conservation of Amazonia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your opening speech. I would like to invite the con team to start your opening speech.
Thank you. Before I start, am I visible and audible?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, dear all. My name is Valentine Lata, representing the Catholic University of Lille. and I will be arguing against the fact that Europe should help Brazil in its protection of Amazonia. Marina Silva, Brazil's former Minister for the Environment, has referred to the country's mismanagement of Amazonia as a crime against humanity because of its implication not only for the indigenous, the continentals, but the global community as a whole. Indeed, Europe must support Brazil, especially with the protection of Amazonia. However, it must not merely do so with the use of international law. It must support Brazil using economic cooperation and diplomatic pressure cumulatively. We will first examine why international law is not sufficient. International law governs the relations between independent states. Rules of law are binding upon states insofar as they emanate from their own will as expressed in conventions or in custom. This very aspect explains why Brazil has not been able to protect Amazonia from deforestation. Indeed, one can observe that deforestation has reached an all-time low in 2012, contrary to now, where the current administration's dismissal of the importance of the Amazon has led to an increase of 34% in deforestation between 2018 and 2019. International law is therefore insufficient as it is subject to political variation, as we can see. Secondly, if Europe had to support Brazil in the protection of Amazonia, it would be because the protection of the environment, especially what is referred to as the lung of the world, is an obligation that is erga omnes because of the central role that Amazonia plays in carbon storage. And this is important in the light of the Paris Agreement, that is, its materialization of the global effort needed towards preventing environmental degradation. Given its national and international relevance, the Amazon has a sui generis title under international law that justifies third countries' entitlement to protect not Brazil's Amazonia, but our Amazonia, and it cannot be mishandled under the pretext of the jus cogens norm of non-interference. Still, international law and the entitlement of Europe in the protection of Amazonia is not sufficient. Europe must cumulate its implications with economic policies. Europe is undoubtedly an economic actor in the fight of the preservation of the environment. As the EU-Mercosur Associate Agreement, this plan has played a significant role in conditioning Brazil's response to deforestation, as Brazil and other countries of the Amazon region receives economic support for a plethora of sectors that are essential for their economy. Diplomatic pressure should also be cumulatively used, as international law does not suffice to coerce Brazil in its local management of Amazonia. It can be seen that after the global outcry of the deforestation and wildfires in the Amazon, Brazil has launched a diplomatic offensive to wildfires to persuade the international community of its environmental credentials. And if one looks through international history, diplomatic positioning has often proven effective in influencing contentious positions. An example can be given with the action of recognition of a state or non-recognition of a state, for instance. Therefore, in conclusion, Amazonia is the lung of the world, and it's not Brazil's Amazonia, but our Amazonia. And international law will not suffice to guarantee its protection, as it is not sufficiently coercive enough. Therefore, besides international law, economic and diplomatic means needs to be employed by Europe to support Brazil's effort in the protection of Amazonia. Thank you.
Opening speech. Now we will stage. Now I would like to invite the pro team to conduct your first argument.
And just before the timer starts, am I visible and audible? Thank you. Well, we thank Ms. Valentin for her arguments, but I shall react to some of the topics brought by exposing our legal view on the matter, which per se reinforces that European aid using international law should be provided. First, we point at the crimes committed in the Amazon, such as illegal logging, biopiracy, and arson, demand an intense international cooperation under the Palermo Convention of Transnational Organized Crimes from 2000. Hence, it is clear that Brazil cannot hold by itself the responsibility of vigilance over illegal acts committed in the Amazon. Secondly, European states, as developed countries, are committed under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to support developing countries in achieving the standards conventionally established. With respect to Brazil, sustainable development in the Amazon was and still is largely dependent on foreign aid, without which Brazil could not comply with the commitments of greenhouse emissions, since the use of natural resources is greatly important for national economics. Under the UN Framework Convention, as Brazil carries the biggest territorial bond with the Amazon, it would bear by itself a disproportionate burden regarding climate change responsibilities. The past Kyoto Protocol, when in force, had an equal disposition regarding the entitlement of developing countries to perceive financial resources to achieve the commitments established in treaties. Lastly, framework conventions themselves indicate that the commitments of developing countries can only be achieved when developed countries implement their own commitments related to financial resources and transfer of technology. Or Europe should cooperate for a more open and supportive international economic system, enabling Brazil to better address its environmental problems, especially regarding the Amazon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite the con team for the first argument.
Before I start my time, could you please confirm that I'm visible and audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, adverse team, for your speech. However, we would like to state that international law will not suffice, especially in the light of the current political context that is not favorable to the protection of Amazonia. Secondly, obliging Europe to act would suppose that it has the responsibility to do so, while 60% of Amazonia is actually located in Brazil and therefore subject to its national exercise. Therefore, its preservation is first and foremost an internal affair. Secondly, Europe is not as participative in the destruction of Amazonia, contrarily to what was stated. Other US companies that are much more active in the destruction of Amazonia could be cited, such as Walmart, Starbucks, or even McDonald's. Thirdly, Amazonia's destruction is also due to constitutional and economic vices within Brazil, because international law does not automatically have constitutional value in Brazil. Indeed, only those ratified with a certain quorum have such an importance, and others may have a supralegality level only if they concern human rights. And because of the fact that the right to a healthy environment has not been consistently considered as a human right, but rather a third generation right under international law, shows that this principle would be subject to derogation because of Brazil's constitution. Because, for example, if one takes the right to work that is contained in Article 5 of the Brazilian Constitution, it would be a grounds to justify deforestation, and it has actually been used, in fact, because of the practice of queimada, which is a season in which Brazilian farmers burn part of Amazonia in order to cultivate more. There's a clear derogation of this principle in the light of constitutional rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution of Brazil. Therefore, the preservation of Amazonia is first and foremost an internal affair or subject to the responsibility of leading companies in its deforestation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Now we will proceed with the second argument from the pro team. Thank you.
Just to confirm one more time, am I clearly visible and audible? Very much. Well, again, we thank Ms. Glory for her arguments, but firstly, although we recognize that Brazil is not strictly compliant with environmental standards, Europe is definitely also not, which reason why it should not be a setback, but rather an incentive for international cooperation. That is mainly because the international community is approaching the recognition of the duty to protect the environment as a use cautious norm, as evidenced by the report on peremptory norms by the UN International Law Commission. Thus, it is clear that environmental norms have become part of the hardcore of international law and have also broadened its concerns over multiple legal activities, as for example, international trade. In this sense, we must point that Europe is one of the global areas in which international trade finds the greatest outburst. It is undeniable that amid such a gigantic commercial flow, illegally extracted natural products from the Amazon fatally have become object to transactions taking place in Europe and also focused on this market. This circumstance entails a more intense control, not just over tariffs, but especially over the compliance with environmental standards, which creates, an obligation for Europe to actively safeguard those rights. It is for reasons like this that we find that Europe is juridically bound to support Brazil using international law in the protection of the Amazon in the form of a genuine international cooperation. Moreover, we firmly believe that such support should supersede a mere donation at the discretion of each state and be conducted as an international obligation, as for example, by the supervision of the exportation activity or the mitigation of illegal extraction for commercial purposes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you. Now we will proceed with the argument from the Conti.
Yes. Am I visible and audible? Yes, thank you. First of all, to rebut on what to just say, I disagree in the points that you raised about the duty of endurance, because a commitment from Europe based on international law would not be efficient. In fact, according to Article 3 of the Declaration of Rio, states that the principle of sovereignty does not preclude the country from having the responsibility not to harm others in the exercise of it, and therefore it is implied that the responsibility pertaining to the preservation of Amazonia is first and foremost an internal affair. Moreover, the current political context is an impediment to progress because of the fact that the EU's intervention has been seen as a colonialist approach toward the current president of Brazil, Bolsonaro. And finally, to revert on what you just actually said, Europe is, I said glory before, a continent composed by many countries and cannot be the source of obligation toward Brazil based on international law. Thus, it will depend of each state. For example, if France wants to act because it has part of its territory there with the French Guiana, but in any case, Europe can be constrained to act under international law in this case, and it needs to be Brazil first to act. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Now we will come to the third argument, also the conclusion of the protein.
Just checking before my time starts, am I visible and audible? Thank you, Ms. Schramm. My name is Matheus Mendonça, and I will now summarize the arguments so far presented by our team, reinforcing the main topics by which we firmly defend that Europe must support Brazil in protecting the Amazon. Firstly, we must not forget that activities in Amazonia generate severe international environmental impacts, as they have the potential of threatening the welfare of both fauna and flora, and creating detrimental conditions that may lead to a climate crisis. That's why one of the most important positive obligations in respect to the forest is the duty of vigilance, which is also precisely what Brazil is currently unable to achieve on its own. Therefore, turn European support the best alternative to guarantee its rightful accomplishment. Moreover, Europe inevitably ends up being somewhat related to the Amazon deforestation, since the existence of a demand for exportation of natural resources is one of the reasons that lead us to the illegal exploitation of Amazonia. Since Europe is an epicenter for international trade, in many cases, these illegal resources fatally cross its borders. Hence, there is an urgent need for the enforcement of the obligation of the international cooperation between Europe and Brazil in order to terminate this transboundary misconduct. Finally, developed countries, as many of the Europeans, have committed to support developing countries and the protection of the environment through financial and technological incentives according to the UN Framework Convention. Thus, we postulate once more that Europe must support Brazil and the protection of Amazonia using international law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll come to the final argument and the conclusion of the Conti.
Hello again. Can you confirm that I'm visible and audible? Okay. Although we agree the situation is very urgent indeed, Europe should not use international law to help Brazil, as the effectiveness of international legal instruments can be debated. While the normative phase was rushed due to the urgency of the situations, which can be understood, the implementation has had very little attention, and there is definitely a lack of material resource since international environmental obligations often require a huge economic and social cost for their implementation. Actually, very few regimes set in international law today actually satisfy the aspect of effectiveness. Furthermore, international law faces a dilemma, the need for hierarchy and constraints, which is always very difficult to attain given the aim for states to conserve their sovereignty. Today, government makes commitments through international law only after having determined that these commitments are in their best interest. And since there are no sanctions that will be applied to punish non-compliance as well as to deter other potential breaches, these commitments are rarely even met. Often it's more about good intentions or political theater than actual commitments and action. For instance, on one hand, the Kyoto Protocol of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change introduces an international regime that is probably the most sophisticated and original regime that, from a legal perspective, appears astonishingly complex. On the other hand, however, there were lengthy negotiations and slow progress. There is very concretely a lack of commitment from states because of the continual economical implications and inevitable discussion of profit, even while talking about environmental matters. It is simply impossible to objectively conceive that such agreements could occur simply through international agreements. As stated before, their mechanisms still to this day lack in enforcement. Deliberations are too long and countries are mostly seek their personal advantages. Same can be said about any environmental issues. Have we seen any proper progress since the Paris Agreements, which the USA, for instance, has continuously joined and departed and joined again, or the multiple COPs, the COP21, the COP24? Not
Sorry
really.
for interrupting you, but your time is up. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations on completing this debate session. And now I would like to invite everyone to turn on your camera and we will receive feedbacks from our judge.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Can you please confirm whether you can hear me and see me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to congratulate both teams. You have both done a great job, and I was really impressed by how much effort you invested in preparing for this session, which I can already tell. And I was also very much impressed by how well articulated you were and then how clearly you formulated the arguments. I was also impressed by the research that you have conducted, which was reflected by the good use of international law sources and also the level to which you developed the arguments. And also I liked how reacted to the arguments of the opposing team, so that I could see this reactivity there. So I appreciated that indeed, and I would indeed encourage you to try to develop this even further. So to use the arguments of the opposing team to your advantage. Okay, and now maybe some comments also and points for improvement. I would like to start with the pro team. Okay, so I did indeed appreciate the arguments, the reference to international instruments, and perhaps what could be even further emphasized is what makes Europe specific. See, so I understand your arguments about the need for support, but what makes Europe different from all other regions? Is there any form of support that could be specific to Europe that you would like to emphasize? And when you construct these arguments, maybe it would be even more helpful if you could provide more concrete examples. So when we talk about cooperation, fulfillment of international commitments and so on, concretely, how could this be achieved? Okay, and but otherwise, it was well structured. I also appreciated especially the good structure of the opening statement, but also the other arguments and the concluding part. It was very easy to follow. the arguments, so congratulations for that. Some points for the CON team. Again, I very much appreciated that you indeed had a lot to say about this topic, and perhaps you can work a bit on the timing, because I had this feeling also with the opening statement and especially with the concluding part that you had more to say than what you could fit into the available time. So perhaps trying to structure it a bit better and yeah, thinking how to make the best use of the time would be helpful. And indeed, one of you actually didn't use the entire time available, and the others kind of had this tendency to go over time. So maybe a little bit more practice would help in that respect. And also in the concluding part, that's also an opportunity where you can bring again to the forefront the legal arguments as well. So I think that you had more to say and we had to cut you off, but this is indeed the moment to reiterate the most important legal arguments that you want to put forward. So maybe that would be an advice for you for the future. But otherwise, thank you very much to both teams. A great job done. I really enjoyed the debate today.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Folders, for very valuable feedback. The results will be processed during the weekend, and we will try to publish it on Monday via email for everyone. And congratulations once again. It was very well done, and I wish you a very nice day or evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.